All right, guys, welcome. This is Dr. Kernut, and we're going to go over real quick the study guide for American Lit 2, Exam 2, which will be due in about 10 days on Tuesday night. So make sure you know the actual date. Again, here's how I want you to study for these. For Exam 1, go through the notes. We're really only doing one literary period this time, so you should know all the characteristics of modernism. Be able to recognize what those are. You want to be able to know the basic distinctions between the Wasteland and the other poets, know who is the least modernistic of them, know who is the most modernistic. Remember, we built a kind of continuum where Frost was the least. Eliot and Pound kind of defined that extremity. You know, you want to know where Cummings is in relation to them, and Williams. I won't ask you the difference maybe between Williams and Cummings, but I do want you to know the differences between who kind of really pioneered the use of fragmentation, juxtaposition, and illusion. Know the differences between Washington and Du Bois. Know where each of those stood on the issue of education. Let's go through these. Characteristics of modernism, Du Bois and Washington. In terms of Ezra Pound, make sure you know the background of In a Station of the Metro and how that poem captures the belief in modernist brevity and juxtaposition and taking out the verb. Make sure that you know what is the main characteristics of the Wasteland, that you can be able to recognize a passage of that. A lot of these questions will ask you which of the following is not true. So you want to look for very obvious ones that are the opposite of what we're looking for. Again, you want to be able to recognize who is least like Eliot, who's least like Pound. In terms of the short stories, you want to know external symbolism, internal symbolism, the differences between those. In terms of Flowering Judas specifically, you want to know what devices that she uses that make that story experimental or modernistic. You want to know the use of interior monologue. You want to know that that story was very atypical, written in the present tense at the time. You want to know what's the other one? The use of the Eucharist symbolism. You want to know in terms of settings where each of the stories, those 4 stories we did in lesson 8 are set. You want to know in particular in Babylon Revisited that Paris was the expatriate center where a lot of the experimental writers flocked to. You want to know the characteristics of the Harlem Renaissance. The main thing is it was Afro-positive. That means it celebrated black heritage and black culture. It was all about the Great Migration, the movement from the South to the North, out of the rural farm plantation belt to the South into the cities like Harlem. You want to know that, and this may get a little tricky, but you want to know that the black writers believed in black people living together. You could argue that sort of suggests they were pro-segregation. They didn't see it that way. They didn't mean legally. They meant culturally that black people best thrived when they were in a community that celebrated black history. It's kind of like the same argument that people have today about historically black universities. Why do we need them? Some people prefer going to colleges where they are immersed in their culture, where their culture is the most prevalent. You also want to know about Marion Moore, about HD. You want to know which of these poets use classical allusions. With HD, I would specifically know which classical figures she writes poems about. With Marion Moore, I think you want to just be on the lookout for some of those images. Her big line was imaginary toads in real gardens. That's kind of the thing that she wants to invent, not poetry that is difficult for the sake of being difficult. Okay, so that's exam one. 10 questions, 10 points apiece, 100 points. Again, you've got 15 minutes, so take your time. That gives you about a minute and a half apiece. They should be all obvious if you just go through the syllabus or through the lessons and really take some time to understand the main points that are provided for each of those. I would try to write some things out. Give yourself a piece of paper. Write out the main characteristics of modernism so you know that you can recognize them. All right, part two, you want to be able to identify characters and passages. So, for example, if I give you a passage of Du Bois, how do you distinguish that from Washington? Well, you're going to look for his more sociological and anthropological interest in black culture, the stuff about the sorrow songs, the stuff about the education. With Booker T. Washington, you want to look for those clues about him being a self-made man, or the entrepreneurial autobiography, the rising up. So you may get a passage where he talks about having been born a slave. You should be able to recognize right away. Anything that says Atlanta Compromise, that's going to be Booker T. Washington. You do want to know Alain Locke's main ideas. It kind of defeats the purpose to give you a passage with the words New Negro in it. But you do want to understand in the lesson about the Harlem Renaissance what each of those writers contributed to it, and make sure you understand that Alain Locke was the kind of the philosopher. He was not a creative writer himself. He was more of the philosopher who explained the characteristics of it. Again, with Marianne Moore, you want to be able to recognize that she did not think poetry should be scholarly, but it should be a reinvention of everyday objects. That's why she has the line about imaginary toads in real gardens. You want to know the characters in the wasteland, the big ones that we talked about. Basically two of them. In the middle of the poem, there's Tiresias, the prophet, who's kind of robbed of his powers of visionary because of the decay of meaning. And then at the end, the Fisher King, who kind of wraps it all up together. In Pound, you want to be able to identify in those excerpts from the cantos what are the major historical events that he sees as changing poetry. The big one, of course, is the Great War. You just want to be able to catch his idea that somehow the 20th century had cheapened experience. You also want to know how he uses illusions. The whole idea that I forget her name. Let's say Pamela. His Pamela was Flaubert. Penelope. His Penelope was Flaubert. That's a line you want to understand the meaning of. Again, it's those uses of illusion. You want to know in Porter, especially, again, know all the settings of those different short stories in Lesson 8. No, Hemingway was writing about Africa. Porter was writing about Mexico after the Mexican Revolution. Sherwood Anderson is writing about grotesques in rural Iowa, and Fitzgerald is writing about expatriates in Paris. You want to be able to recognize sort of the main thematic statement of each of those. If I give you the passage about Eugenio and the Eucharist, recognize that that's flowering Judas. If I give you some sort of description about the hands, know that it's hands. If I give you a passage about the leopard on Mount Kilimanjaro, or the italicized sequence in Hemingway, know that's Hemingway. For Fitzgerald, Babylon Revisited, you want to know the symbols by which he sort of argued that values were dissolving or attenuating because of the easy money that the boom in the 1920s caused and what the stock market broke down. In terms of the modernist poetry in Lesson 9, you do want to understand what imagism was. That was the movement that Pound, and to a lesser extent William Carlos Williams, worked in. You want to understand how the red wheelbarrow kind of emblematizes the techniques of imagism. Same with pounds in a station of the metro. Those are both examples of that. Keep in mind, one of the techniques of imagism was to take out the verb. So you're really just getting that verbal sculpture of an object that reinvents it. Probably the most difficult thing is to recognize a Cummings poem. So what I would do is look at the content and make sure you can recognize the lines that jump out. If I give you that line about that kind of mixes patriotic songs with by Gory, by Jingo, by Golly Gee, or whatever it is, know that that's the, of course, of course, next to God, America, whatever that title is, that you could recognize that. For the Cambridge Ladies, you want to know the allusions that are in those poems to other poets and religious figures. Stevens is a little tricky because it's so abstract. I would look at either the beginning, I would look at both the beginning of the poem and the end of the poem, because those are really the two key places where it kind of sets out the idea that that's a poem in which he argues that the imagination is the new religion, that the imagination creates the world, but it's also mortal and that it's going to die. Remember, death is the mother of beauty. Remember that opening line about Sunday morning and about not being in worship. You want to know Langston Hughes's message. You want to understand that he was all about the blues, be able to tell me what the blues represented for him. For Claude McKay, you want to be able to tell me what the Harlem Dancer symbolizes. For Zora Neale Hurston, you want to understand the idea that this is a sad story about a couple getting back together, and the white people in the story absolutely are oblivious to Joe's suffering because Missy May commits adultery. And again, in HD, you want to know the allusions that she uses to classical literature. So again, what I would do for part 2 is take your syllabus, kind of go through each poem, ask yourself what lines are in the lessons that we talk about being the kind of the ones that capture the main theme, be able to recognize the major characters of each work. You know, I'm not going to give you Helen and ask you to know that that's Harry's wife, but it's also Helen of Troy. That would be a little nitpicky. But I do want you to be able to recognize most of the named characters. Slemons out of Zora Neale Hurston's Gilded Six Bits. You know, be able to recognize Charlie out of Babylon Revisited and his daughter Honoria. So just go down each work on the syllabus and ask yourself, who are the main characters? What passage would be the main theme? I would look at the beginning of the work and the end of the work. Those are usually pretty thematically relevant. For each one, ask yourself, what do I need to know about this poem that would help me recognize it? All right. So again, those are the best ways to study. Please do study. And again, I've changed the question on these. Now, we had one person that got in there before I could redo the test. So I've updated your score to the, because we're giving more points this time. But I do want you to understand that these are new test questions. So don't get on Quizlet, because that's not gonna help you. I've laid out how to study and you should be okay. All right, we've got 10 days to do it, so you got plenty of time. If you have any questions, please go ahead and email me. I did post comments on discussion question, whatever one we're on this week, number 9. Yeah, 9 and 10. And I'll do 10 on Wednesday. So go ahead and be working on the last batch. We're down to the crunch time. We've only got about 3 more weeks. We'll get there. You'll be fine. We'll have some extra credit at the end. All right, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll talk to you on Wednesday. Thank you.